There is some, there's milestones in your life. And we all kind of have those milestones. This is a kind of one of those days where, well, I'll just be straight. I moved up to a large print Bible. Just I realize that it's not that I can't read, it's that I can't see. And so I had to come to terms that my Bible just got bigger. It's horrible. We're in the Gospel of Luke chapter 21. If you're new with us this morning, we've been going through the life of Jesus. Started in chapter 1 of the Gospel of Luke. We're now in chapter 21 of the Gospel of Luke. Jesus is in the middle of the longest sermon, or I should say the second longest sermon that he gave. The first longest was found in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus had given an incredible sermon on what it means to be part of this kingdom that he came to establish. That was the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus in Luke chapter 21 is giving a second sermon, this one about what it means after he departs, and then all of the things that will transpire as a result of that, and what it means to live your life for the kingdom to come rather than this kingdom. And Jesus is going to spend some time doing that with his disciples. It all began as Jesus began this sermon, and it's known as the Olivet Discourse for the location that it was given in. Jesus had just left the Temple Mount, where he had overturned the tables, he was doing miracles, healing the lame and the blind, and then Jesus has taken his disciples and he began to tell them of all the things that he was declaring, everything he was seeing. One of those things was a woman who had walked in to give an offering into the offering box. They would have these little agape boxes. They were called trumpet boxes, and they kind of looked like a trumpet. They were kind of fat on the bottom and kind of went into a real thin on the top. And they were there to receive the offerings of the people. And one woman walks up. She was a widow, and it says she put in 2 little mites, which is like pennies. While the rich were putting in mass amounts of money into the offering box. And Jesus called the disciples and he says, guys, check this out. That woman who put in her 2 mites has put in more than all of the others. And the disciples are kind of taken back by that. Like, how can 2 mites support this incredible structure? The Temple Mount, the building, the gold, all of the sacrifices. And so they asked Jesus, look at the beauty of this temple. Now, Josephus tells us that when you would look at the temple, it would shine like the sun. It would glare. You would have to literally turn away. It was so bright. And so Jesus says, look, guys, this temple is going to be destroyed and not one stone will be left upon another. That was like, what are you talking about, Jesus? Jesus is saying, look, all of this doesn't matter. It's all going to be wiped out. It's all going to be destroyed. And the disciples, at that point, take Jesus, aside, the first chance they get, and they ask Jesus, when are these things going to be? And what are the signs of the end of the age? That's the 2 questions they asked Jesus. Jesus, when is this going to happen? You're talking about, the temple being destroyed. You're talking about, all of these things happening. And then you're talking about, just something that's going to be catastrophic. And Jesus says, look, these things are going to happen. And the first thing he says, but don't get alarmed. He says, first of all, there's going to be a lot of deceivers that come into the world. There's going to be a lot of false prophets. There's going to be a lot of people claiming to be me, and they're not. And so he gives them the first thing to be careful for. Be careful for deceivers, for false prophets. And then he says, and secondly, there's going to be wars. And what Jesus is declaring to his disciples at this point is that there's time is going to pass. He said it's not going to happen immediately. This isn't going to be something that happens the moment I die or the first time that you hear of a battle or a war take place. He goes, these things are going to happen, over a time period. And he lets the disciples know that. But he does tell them that the temple will be destroyed. We won't get that far this morning. We're going to look at verses 10 through 19 this morning, verses 20 to verse 24. He's going to talk about the temple and what's going to happen after that. We're going to spend some time in a very specific section here. Now, what Jesus is going to tell them in these passages is that the temple is not only going to be destroyed, but it's going to be completely annihilated. The whole city is going to be waste. It's going to be a total destruction taking place. And all of it for one reason, man, because they had rejected the Savior that had come into the world to die for them. All of Jerusalem wiped out because they had an opportunity to receive their Messiah that would save them. And then, as a result of it, God's going, now the wrath of God, the judgment of God is coming upon the city of Jerusalem. And then on a grander scale, and this is what we're going to look at this morning, the grander scale is the same thing's going to happen to the whole world. It's all going to be wiped out one day. That if you're looking at this world and going, here's where my hope is, or here's where my confidence is, he wants you and I to understand that all of this can be wiped out in a minute, in a moment, and eventually will be. And so if you're going to put your confidence here, then you're putting your confidence in the wrong place. And the apostles would reaffirm that on a couple of different occasions. In the book of 1 John chapter 2, the first verse 15, this is what John says. He says, do not love this world or the things that are in this world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all it is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. Watch what he says in verse 17. And the world is passing away, and the lust of it, but he who does the will of God abides forever. It's all passing away. Everything here one day is gonna, kind of like, you mean New York? You mean LA? You mean, downtown Albuquerque? You serious? Yeah, all of it. It's all passing away. London and every other major metropolis in the face of the earth, it's all going to be destroyed one day. And just like the apostles that looked to the Temple Mount as something that would never be shaken or never be moved, Jesus is going to tell his disciples, look, everything in this world is going to come unraveled one day. In Peter's account in 2 Peter chapter 3, this is what Peter says in the 10th verse. He says, but the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away and with a great noise. The elements will melt with a fervent heat. Both the earth and the works that are in them will be burned up. Therefore, since all these things will be dissolved, what manner of person ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness, looking for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be dissolved, being on fire, and the elements will melt with a fervent heat. He says, look, all that's here, it's all going to be done away with one day. So how should you be living your life if that's the truth, if that's the reality? And that's how Peter conveyed it. And so in these opening verses of the Olivet Discourse, there, verses 7 through 9, we saw Jesus warning about the things to come and then telling us they're not going to happen immediately. And then in verse 10, we're going to jump into now this next section. Now, when we start this section, there's a parallel passage. We find it in Mark's gospel and in Matthew's gospel. It's the same sermon, but Matthew gives us a little greater details when he conveys this sermon or this discourse in his account of it. Luke gives us the condensed version. Matthew gives us the expanded version of it. And one of the things that Matthew, and I think it's important to note as Matthew conveys it, he's saying, look, all these things, and he's talking about the things we're going to look at, the nation against nation, the kingdom against kingdom, the earthquakes, the famines, the pestilence, the signs in the heavens, all of those things. He says all of these things are the beginning of sorrows. That's how Matthew puts it. He says all of these things are the beginning of sorrows. And that is a term that you and I would be familiar with if you would use it the way it was originally intended. You see, I think the translators, and I'm not knocking the translators, I think the translators are trying to give us a little more, like, this is just the beginning of what's going to happen. It's going to be a sorrowful time, and it's just the beginning of it. But I think the word birth pangs has a better idea of what Jesus is conveying here. Because we know what birth pangs are. We don't call them birth pangs anymore. We call them contractions. Right? And you ladies that have had children, you know exactly what a contraction is. If you're a husband and your wife has had baby, you know what a contraction is. Because you start to at some point she starts, man, I'm starting to have contractions. And then the first thing you do is pull out your stopwatch. How far apart are they? Right? Well, they're still an hour apart. Okay, we got time. No big deal. Half hour apart. Okay, things are happening. Things are happening. Half an hour, now you're thinking, are the bags packed? Are we ready to go? And then they go from half hour to 15 minutes to 10 minutes and then, 5 minutes. And that means things are happening. They start to happen in greater frequency and they start to happen in greater intensity. And I think that's exactly what Jesus is declaring when it comes to the end of the age and the events that he's going to describe. It's going to happen in greater frequency and it's going to happen in greater intensity. The closer that it gets, you're going to see a greater amount and you're going to see a greater intenseness in the things that do happen, the things that he describes. And so we're watching all of this stuff. There's always been earthquakes. There's always been wars. I was reading the last 2,000 years, I think there was less than 200 years where we haven't had wars going on. There's always been famines. There's always been pestilence. I mean, these things happen in every generation. Yeah, they do. But Jesus is saying, look, those things are going to happen, and then they're going to happen more frequently, and then they're going to happen in greater intensity as we get closer to the end. And so Jesus gives these warnings. Look at verse 10. We're going to read all the way down to verse 19, and then we'll come back and take a look at that. Watch what he says. And Jesus said to them, nation will rise up against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes in the various places, and famines and pestilence. There will be fearful sights and great signs from heaven. But before all these things, they will lay their hands on you and persecute you. They'll deliver you up to the synagogues and prisons. You will be brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake. It will turn out for you as an occasion for testimony. Therefore, settle in your hearts not to meditate beforehand on what you will answer, for I will give you a mouth and wisdom which all your adversaries will not be able to contradict or to resist. You'll be betrayed even by parents, brothers, relatives, friends, and they will put some of you to death. You'll be hated by all for my name's sake, but not a hair of your head shall perish or shall be lost. By your patience, possess your souls. Jesus is continuing the thought of that question of, when are these things going to take place, and what are the signs that are going to show us that they're going to take place. And so Jesus begins to explain to his disciples, look, there's going to be nation rising against nation. There's going to be nations fighting against each other, wars and conflicts. We've seen World War I, World War II. We've seen conflicts throughout different regions for thousands of years. Kingdom against kingdom. Now, a nation is one thing, but a kingdom is something different. A kingdom is kind of like, someone who's kind of trying to establish something that's not officially acknowledged as a nation. And, we're watching the rise of all of these little different sects and different kind of groups that are trying to build their own military. We watched, the Taliban and then ISIS and, the fighters in Africa. I mean, there's all of these different, battles that are taking place, all these different rogue, different groups that come, into play, and then, they want to try to take territory or rule over particular pieces of land. And Jesus goes, look, all those things are going to happen. There's going to be wars. There's going to be nations and kingdoms all conflicting with one another. That doesn't mean it's the end. I think, the tendency right away, whenever you start to see something transpire and it's in your own backyard, you think this is the end, right? It's the end. And you go, that's not the end. Just because there's a conflict in this circumstance or in that culture or that situation doesn't mean it's the end. He says there's going to be the natural disasters that are going to take place. Not just the wars, not just the kingdom fighting against each other. There's going to be the natural disasters going to take place. And one of those natural disasters is the earthquakes. I was reading a couple of the studies that 8.0 earthquakes have almost doubled since 2000 to 2018. And when you're looking at about a 20-year span, it looks like they're just becoming more and more intense and greater frequency of that intensity. And we've seen in our lifetime, many of you guys, in 2004, the Indian Ocean earthquake where the tsunami killed 227,898 people. I was someone who kind of from afar gave a great attention because you're going, man, that's massive amount of people. I can remember it like it was yesterday. Remember the earthquake in Haiti, over 200,000. They're saying 200,000 plus. They still don't even have an accurate account of how many in Haiti died as a result of the earthquake that took place there in Prince of Call. This is 2004, 2010, 2005, Pakistan, over 86,000 people died in an earthquake. In China, in 2008, 69,000 people died. East Japan, 2011, 15,870 people. In Sumatra, Indonesia, 2005, 1,300 people died. I mean, we're seeing these things on a regular basis. That doesn't mean that means it's the end. It means that things are intensifying, just like Jesus said they would be. Becoming more frequent. Becoming more the norm. There'd be famines. And these famines would have, great effect. We're watching, even to this day in the Sudan and Nigeria and Somalia and Yemen, and much of it as a result of wars that are taking place and skirmishes that are happening in the region that people don't even have a chance to plant or the opportunity to get a crop harvested because of these wars. And many of them, people dying by the thousands because of a lack of nutrition. We're watching all of it. It's happening in our day, in our culture. And those things have been happening. It's not something like, well, it just started happening. No, that's been going on for ages. We have pestilence. And it's crazy. The idea of pestilence, he's not talking about like mosquitoes or anything. Okay? He's talking about like bugs and superbugs, the viruses that go through, man. We got, Ebola and West Nile and AIDS and syphilis and, all of these things. And the scientists are concerned about these superbugs because they're becoming, they're adapting to how much antibiotics that we're feeding into our bodies. And they're just becoming, now adapting into those things. And what's incredible is that there's a lack of research into those superbugs right now. Because there's no money there. There's not a whole lot of, research money. They're selling that on the market isn't producing a great amount of money. So the scientists, if you're looking to make money, and that's usually where all the funding comes from, is that, they're doing all the research on recreational stuff rather than life-saving stuff. They're doing a lot more research on Viagra than they are on superbugs. Sad, that's true. That's our culture that we're living in because it's all about pleasure rather than reality. That's what you and I are facing, guys. It's crazy. All of these things, they're now, I can't even get into it. I mean, some of the stuff's so just ludicrous. But the result is going to be mass pestilence if something's not done in those arenas. There's some bugs that they're saying that we don't have the means to stop these bugs from spreading in mass amounts. And we're seeing like an upsurge of a lot of the things that we thought we were done with. And so these things, this is where we're at culturally. That's where we're at, in our time. And then he says there's going to be fearful sights and great signs from heaven. Fearful sights. Did you guys watch any of the tornado that just went, Michael? There in Florida, the before and after pictures of that. I mean, it's like a bomb went off right on the coast, and just billions of dollars just wiped out. Thank God there wasn't a huge loss of life, but there was still loss of life. It was the tsunami, that took place there in the Indian Ocean. That I remember going there after it was over. We went to go do a conference, and we stopped in that area about a couple months after it had happened. We went to Thailand, and I remember just walking the streets, and just the devastation it was hard to fathom how much destruction had taken place in just 1 minute's time. That tsunami hit the shores. And we see it, man. Hurricane Harvey, that was just last year. Katrina, a few years back. Michael, I mean, these, it seems like, but we can't even finish rebuilding one before the next one's coming upon us. You can't even, wrap your mind around what had just happened before the next event happens. And, you watch the news, you're like, man, how do you even keep up with all of this stuff? And Jesus declares, look, all these things are going to happen. It's going to be like birth pangs. They're going to intensify. And one day, here's the deal. If you're having birth pangs, you're having contractions, one day, even after all the pain, that little baby comes out, and you're going, oh, it's so worth it. You're so cute. And what's crazy is that a couple months later, maybe not a couple months, a couple years later, that mama says, you know what, I want another one. Are you crazy? Do you remember the contractions? Do you remember the pain? Do you remember? But there's just like it was all worth it. It was all worth it because I'm holding this life. And just like the contractions that this world is going through, one day, guys, it's going to bring forth joy. Because we're going to be out of this broken world, and we're going to be in a world where there's no more pain and no more suffering and no more tears, and we're going to be in the presence of Jesus forever and ever and ever and ever. But we're still in this broken world. And Jesus is declaring to his disciples, and I think the reason he's declaring these things is because he don't want them to have some false sense of security or this false sense of reality. Look, this is what the world's going to look like. Because when you become a Christian, it doesn't mean that everything's roses. It doesn't mean everything's going to be perfect from here out. Now I'm a Christian, man. Everything's going to be awesome. God's going to put money in my bank account. God's going to, I'm never going to get sick again. I'm never going to have problems again. I'm never going to have trials again. I'm just going to, no, that's not what the Bible teaches. Matter of fact, this next section, Jesus is saying, guys, hold on. Because not only is the world going to intensify when it comes to natural disasters and events take place, but understand something, man. Those who are in opposition to me are going to intensify against you. And that's exactly what Jesus declared. This isn't just a physical thing. This is a spiritual thing. It's a spiritual thing in that you're going to face opposition, Christian. Look what he says right there. Look at verse 12. But before all these things, they will lay their hands on you. They're going to persecute you. They're going to deliver you up to the synagogues and to prisons. In other words, guys, you're going to face opposition because of what you put your faith in, because who you put your faith in. And it's going to be, now you would think the synagogue of all places, that would be the safe place. That's where the people who love God, who believe in God are. But it was those in the synagogue that were going to reject the Messiah and anyone who put their faith in him. And in that culture, if you were brought up in a Jewish home, your family was Jewish, you held on to the Jewish faith, and you converted to Christianity, you were like a dead to the rest of the family. Your mom and dad would reject you. Your family would reject you. You would lose your job. You would lose your position in the religious synagogues. You would lose your standing in society. You would literally be ostracized from the community. And he says, understand something, even in the synagogue and the prison. Now here's the difference. The synagogue was the religious realm. The prison was the political realm. That was governments. And he says there's not just going to be a religious realm that's going to reject you. It's going to be the government that's going to reject you and what you believe, what you stand for. So Jesus is warning his disciples. He's wanting them to understand, look, what you've chosen is to live a life in opposition to this world. And because you've made that decision to live your life in opposition to this world, then the rest of this world is going to live in opposition to you. And they're going to reject you, and they're going to reject what you say. But look what Jesus says there in verse 12, the middle of it. You will be brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake. Because you're going to be brought before the highest positions in the world. Kings, rulers. And then watch what he says. But it will turn out for you as an occasion for testimony. Now here's what Jesus is saying. Look, you're going to get handcuffed. You're going to be thrown into the prisons. You're going to be rejected in the synagogue. And when you have this opportunity to stand before that king or that ruler, you're going to have an opportunity to tell them who I am. Guys, that's a pretty daunting promise, isn't it? He goes, guys, you're going to be the lucky ones. You're going to stand before the king that's going to want to cut your throat off. And you're going to have an opportunity to tell them about me. And if you go through the book of Acts, this is what's incredible. You go through the book of Acts, and time after time after time, that plays out in the life of the apostles. It was in Acts chapter 4, in the 13th verse, it was Peter who was arrested because he was proclaiming Jesus to the masses because Peter got their attention because he healed a lame man that was in the temple. And as Peter tells that man to stand up and walk, everyone's going, man, who's this Jesus? And Peter begins to tell them about why this man had got healed. And then in chapter 4, as he's standing before all of Sanhedrin, he begins to give an account and tell them what happened. And it tells us their conclusion of it. Acts 4:13, it says this, and when they saw the boldness of Peter and John, they perceived that they were uneducated and untrained men, and they marveled, and they realized that they had been with Jesus. Isn't that cool? He says, look, they looked at Peter and John, they go, these guys are a bunch of hillbillies. These guys, they've never had an education. They've never had training. They've never been to the rabbinical schools. And yet they're there declaring things that are biblical and spiritual. And he says, the only thing they conclude, they weren't trained men. They weren't educated men. But these men had been with Jesus. Because he was outsmarting the educated. Pretty cool. Look at Stephen. Here's another one. In Acts chapter 6, verse 10, it says that after Stephen gave his account, he says, and they were not able to resist the wisdom and the spirit by which he spoke. It goes, Stephen was declaring to them what God was saying, and they weren't able to resist it. If you want a good sermon to read, go back and read Acts chapter 7. Stephen gives his sermon, and he goes from the history of Israel all the way from Abraham all the way down to Jesus, and he starts to explain to them how they had resisted the Holy Spirit the whole time, how God had been trying to get their attention the whole time, and how they had rejected God's truth the whole time. And he says, you guys resist the Holy Spirit. And as Peter concluded that passage, it tells us in Acts chapter 7, verse 54, it says, and when they heard these things, they were cut to the heart, and they gnashed at him with their teeth. But he, being full of the Holy Spirit, he gazed into heaven, and he saw the glory of God, and Jesus standing at the right hand of God. And he said, look, I see the heavens open, and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God. And they cried out with a loud voice. They stopped their ears, and they ran at him with one accord, and they cast him out of the city, and they stoned him. And the witness laid down their clothes at the feet of a young man by the name of Saul. And that was Saul, who we know as Paul the Apostle. He argued them, explained to them. They couldn't resist his wisdom. And so they stick their finger in their ears, and they just started screaming as they attacked Stephen. The wisdom that God had given. And Jesus is telling his disciples, look, guys, settle this in your heart. Look, notice how he says that there in verse 14. Therefore, settle in your hearts not to meditate beforehand on what you will answer, for I will give you a mouth and wisdom which all of your adversaries will not be able to contradict or resist. He goes, man, I'm going to give you the wisdom from heaven so that when all of these arguments that this world's going to reject and try to deny who I am, he goes, they're not going to be able to resist it, not going to be able to deny it. It was Paul the Apostle who was standing before King Agrippa, and as he was telling King Agrippa what God had done in his life. I was a Pharisee at one time, and I was the religious person that was excelling in everything I was doing. But God got a hold of me. Jesus, I encountered him on the way to Damascus, going to arrest more Christians, and he threw me to the ground, and he started, conveying to Agrippa, the gospel and how God had delivered him and how God was with him. And it tells us in Acts 26:27, King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know that you believe. This was going to look, Agrippa, you know these things are true. And Agrippa says this, you almost persuaded me to become a Christian. The king, because you almost persuaded me. You almost had an argument so good that I wouldn't read. And Paul says, look, I pray that not only did I persuade you, I pray that you become like I am. Except for these chains. There's nothing greater that I want for you, King Agrippa, than you would become a Christian, that you would understand the hope that I have. Incredible. Jesus had told them before these things went down that these are the things that would happen. That he would give them the wisdom to speak, and then they wouldn't be able to contradict, they wouldn't be able to resist. And I'll tell you guys, that same thing is true for those that are bold enough to speak in our day. When God gives you the door that he opens up for you to share your faith with a family or a friend or a neighbor or an acquaintance. And you're just like, God, I don't even know what to say, but God, help me to say it. And then you with boldness, just open your mouth. And let me tell you, man, God will blow your mind. He'll say things, through you that you're going to stand back and go, where did that come from? I didn't know I knew that. You're going to want to start taking notes of your own sermon. Because God will give you the words. If you'll just be bold enough to obey him, declare what he says. And it's amazing because I can't tell you how many times I'm just like, God, I don't even know how to answer that. And then, you just like, all right, Lord, I'm going to go for it. And you just start sharing, and you realize God wanted to talk to that person. And he gives you things that you didn't even know that you knew. But it takes faith. It takes, I'm willing to, I believe what God says, that he would give me the words when I need them. I'm going to speak and let God, speak through me. And these apostles, he said, don't meditate. Don't go and try to come up with your 5 points that you're going to try to hit them with. You just trust that I'm going to speak through you in that moment. That doesn't mean you don't study your word. Doesn't mean you don't spend time knowing what God says. But it means that don't be fearful when the world opposes you. Because let me tell you something, man. The reason the world's opposing you is because they're opposing him. And I think that's what Jesus is conveying to his disciples. They're not opposing you. They're opposing me. And I'm able to give them the word that they need to hear to bring them to the place where they got to consider what it is that eternity is all about. And so Jesus tells his disciples, look, I'm gonna give you the words. I'm gonna give you the abilities in order for you to be able to speak when it's needed to be spoken. Now, this whole idea, guys, persecution. This whole idea that if you're going to live a Christian life, then there's going to be opposition. I'm just being real with you. This isn't a feel-good message, okay? If you're going to live a Christian life, you're going to be opposed. Because the God of this world and those who are following the God of this world are heading down a different path. And you, as one who's saying, I want God to guide me, I want God's Spirit to live me, I want to live for eternity, you're going to be in direct opposition to this world. If you want to compromise, you want to just kind of go along and not stand for anything, you can get by. But if you're going to hold on to what God's word says and what a Christian is, and you're going to make a stand somewhere, understand something, this world isn't going to take favor to you. And I think that's what Jesus wants his disciples to understand. That there's going to be opposition. Paul, in his letter to Timothy, in 2 Timothy 3:12, and again, here's one of those verses I think every Christian should have highlighted in their Bible. Every Christian should have this highlighted. 2 Timothy 3:12. Watch what it says. Yes, and all who desire to live godly in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution. All who desire to live godly in Christ Jesus will. It's a promise. It's going to happen. You're going to suffer persecution. I think that just kind of, that's an eye-opener, man. That should get your attention. You mean if I'm going to live godly in this world, then I'm going to be opposed? Yes. You are. Because the rest of this world doesn't want to live godly, and you're going to be the one thing that reminds them that they're not. And you're going to suffer persecution. John chapter 15, verse 20, Jesus said this to his disciples. Remember the word that I said to you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they had kept my word, they would keep yours also. Jesus said, look, you think that because you're a Christian, you're not going to be persecuted? They persecuted me. That they're going to obey what you say? They didn't obey what I said. Don't think that somehow you're exempt. Jesus in Matthew chapter 5, that's the Sermon on the Mount, the longest sermon Jesus gave, Matthew 5:11, he says, blessed are you when they revile and they persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. See, Jesus over and over and over again reminds them, look, guys, you're going to be persecuted. And it's not going to be persecuted just from those on the outside. There's going to be persecution even from those on the inside. Well, that's the next verse. Look what he says in verse 16. You will be betrayed, even by parents and brothers and relatives and friends. And they will put some of you to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake. Even your own blood, even your own parents, even your own brothers, your friends that you thought were your friends, they'll turn on you if you're going to follow after Jesus. They'll betray you. They'll betray your trust. They'll betray your friendship. They'll betray, the honor that a husband and a wife, a brother and a brother, and a brother and a sister, and a mom and a dad. I mean, you'll be betrayed because what you understand is that there's two different courses that you put yourself on, and the spiritual one has a greater importance than the physical one. And even your own family. It was that parallel passage in Matthew. He says, you'll be hated by all nations for my name's sake. He didn't just say, it's not just going to be your family. There's going to be whole kingdoms that hate you. We're watching that play out, aren't we? Looking at ISIS and all of those Taliban. I mean, they hate us just because we don't have the same religion that they have. So we see these things, not ignorant to them. Be hated by all nations for my name's sake. We saw Jesus, and one of the most amazing chapters in the scriptures, John chapter 15, where Jesus talks to his disciples. He says, I'm the vine, my Father's the vine dresser, and those that abide in me are going to bear fruit. I mean, it was talking about relationship, and he's talking about, you guys are now part of the kingdom, and your life's going to produce something. But as he gets to the end of that passage in John chapter 15 in verse 18, he wanted them to understand that even though you're part of this kingdom now, even though you're part of this family now, you're still in opposition to this world. And watch what he says in John 15:18. He says, if the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. Yet because you're not of the world, because I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they're going to persecute you. If they kept my word, they'd keep yours also. But all these things they will do to you for my name's sake. Well, check this out. Because they do not know him who sent me. They're going to persecute you because they don't know God. And because they don't know God, they're going to be on a different course than God. They're going to be in opposition to God and what he stands for in his kingdom. I love that Jesus is just so candid with the disciples. He's not saying, look, you just sign up to be part of us and everything's going to be wonderful. No, when you sign up to be part of us, you're signing up to be in opposition to this world. And the world's not going to receive you. It's not going to embrace you. It's not going to say, oh, I'm glad that's working for you. The world's going to want to mock you and, mock Christianity and mock anyone who puts their faith in. We're watching it play out and like we've never seen it before. In our culture, we've been pretty sheltered as a nation, haven't we? Think about it. I mean, you're in a Muslim nation. You profess Christ. Get ready to get shanked. Get ready to die. Get ready to go to prison. Get ready to totally have an immediate consequence. That's just reality. Freedom of religion. It only happens in America. Okay. or in at least civilized societies. That ain't true for much of society, many kingdoms and many nations. But here's the interesting thing. You're going to be hated because of your association with Jesus. That's what the world hates about. You know, you can say God, or you can say Allah, or you can say Buddha, or you can name it, but you say the name Jesus, and everything changes. Because Jesus is the name that's above every name, and it's the one name that you must believe in order to be saved. That's what the Bible declares. And so it's the name of Jesus. And Jesus said, look, because you believe in me. Now, let me go one more verse. One more verse. Matthew chapter 10. Look at verse 34. And we're gonna wrap it up here. I'm gonna ask you to turn there real quick. Matthew chapter 10, look at verse 34. Just in case you're at this point going, I don't think Jesus was really saying that. I think you're exaggerating, Pastor. Look at Matthew chapter 10, look at verse 34. Do not think that I came to bring peace on earth. This is Jesus. If your Bible's a red letter Bible, that means the words of Jesus are in red. It's in red, right? Do not think that I came to bring peace on earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. That's inevitable. Okay. I'm kidding. I got a great daughter-in-law. I'm just okay. And a man's enemies will be those of his own household. Watch this. And he who loves his father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he who loves his son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. This is Jesus, guys. And what Jesus is declaring is that your physical relationship with even your own children, even with your own spouse, even with your own mom and dad, he says, you know what? That doesn't take precedence over the commitment and relationship you have between you and me. And I can't tell you how many people I've talked to over the years that have said, you know what, I can't become a Christian because if I become a Christian, I start, studying the Bible and going to a church that's teaching the Bible, then my parents will disown me, or they'll hate me, or they'll never speak to me again. And they say, maybe after they pass away, then I'll get right with God, or then I'll start seeking after God. Because I'm so involved with my family religion that I'm not willing to stand up and to say, God, I want to know what you say. It's crazy. And Jesus, look, I came to bring a sword. You have to choose. And when you do choose to follow him, you're going to have opposition not just in the synagogue, in the religious realm. You'll have opposition in the political realm, in the government realm. And so Jesus very, very clearly and very distinctly says, look, I didn't come in here just to bring peace. I came to bring a choice. And when you make a choice, it's going to cause a division. Whose side are you going to be on? Whose kingdom are you going to live your life for? Now, notice what Jesus says in that last verse. And again, we wrap it up here. Verse 17, verse 18. But not a hair of your head shall be lost. Guys, if you're looking at it on a physical realm, you're going, wait a second. Didn't Stephen get martyred? Didn't Paul die a martyr's death? Didn't Peter die? I mean, all these guys, and then, you look at the Roman emperor and they would burn Christians at the stake. Their hair got burned. What do you mean not a hair will get lost? Well, the word lost isn't a physical term. It's a spiritual term. In your old King James, it says, not a hair will perish. And the idea of perishing is the idea that you will be eternally separated, lost. And so he says, don't worry about it. You will lose nothing. Not even a hair of your head will be lost if you put Jesus first in your life. If you choose to follow his path, Even though the world will turn on you, Jesus will always embrace you. And you will be with him for all of eternity. And then he says, by your patience possess your souls. It's an interesting word. That word patience means to be able to hold up in the face of difficulty. The word patience, to be able to hold up in the face of difficulty. And being able to hold up in the face of difficulty possesses, or the idea there is that you procure or you preserve your soul. It's an interesting thought here. Because what Jesus is telling his disciples is that they're about to suffer great persecution. They're about to be brought before kings and rulers, and he's going to give them the words to say, and many of them are going to be killed as a result of it. But don't worry about it, because you're not going to lose anything. You're not going to lose your soul. And your soul is the most valuable possession that you have. Your soul is the only thing that's eternal. Everything else is going to perish, guys. The only thing that doesn't perish is your soul. And depending on where you align your life up, man, with God or against God, will determine on where your soul spends eternity. And it's the only thing that matters. Jesus would say that in Matthew chapter 10. I'm just going to wrap it up right here. Matthew 10:7. He says, whatever I tell you in the dark, speak in the light. Whatever you hear in the ear, preach it on the housetops. And watch what he says. Do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. But rather fear him who's able to destroy both the soul and the body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a copper coin, and not one of them falls to the ground apart from your Father's will? But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Do not fear, therefore. You are of more value than many sparrows. Don't fear. Don't fear this world. Don't fear what man can do to you. Fear God. And live in a way that you're going to live for his glory and for his kingdom. And in doing so, guys, here's the deal, man. You're going to be in opposition to a world that's running against him, that's in rebellion to him, that doesn't want to. And the next few chapters, man, that's exactly what Jesus declares. He says, look, this whole world, it's all heading for destruction. The only thing that matters is that you hold your course. Don't waver. By patience, endurance, you secure, you obtain your eternity. There's a lot of people who come in, oh yeah, I believe in Jesus, but the moment a trial comes, a moment a persecution comes, anytime opposition comes, they like, oh, I don't know about that Jesus. Maybe I made a mistake. That's not a Christian. See, a Christian is someone who says, I understand what this means. This is eternal stuff, man. And I'm not going to play games with this world and somehow compromise myself with this world. I want to live my life for the kingdom of heaven. And in doing so, man, I'm putting myself in opposition to this world. And I don't care. Because I'm going to choose to live my life for heaven.